The table was too long for the room. That was the first thing I noticed as I sat at the far end, my hands folded neatly in my lap, the silverware perfectly aligned in front of me. The chandelier light above us glittered like a stage spotlight, and everyone was performing, laughing too loudly, smiling too brightly, leaning in just enough to be seen but never close enough to touch. Thanksgiving dinner. My house. And still, I was the guest. Kalian's laugh cut through the air first, bright and elegant, the kind of laugh that made people turn toward her, even when she said nothing worth hearing. "Oh, Rivian, you're terrible," she giggled, tapping her younger sister's wrist as if they shared a private world the rest of us were lucky to witness. Rivian smiled sweetly, always sweet, always pleasant, but her eyes glimmered with something colder. "I'm just saying," Rivian continued, "some people should really learn how to contribute." Her voice was sugared honey, the kind you don't notice is poisoning you until your throat closes. A few chuckles. A few knowing glances down the table. I didn't look up. I didn't need to. I already knew they meant me. Alira, my mother, sat nearest the head of the table, hands folded like a queen presiding over her court. She didn't look at me. She rarely did. She sipped her wine, eyes half-lidded, enjoying the performance, the familiarity of it. Joran, my father, sat beside her, nodding here and there. He always nodded. He lived his life nodding to whoever spoke the loudest. "And Sarah," Kalian said suddenly, turning toward me with that gentle, pitying smile that always meant she was about to say something cruel. "How's work?" "Still figuring things out." A pause. The table froze in the way prey animals freeze when something is watching. I kept my face smooth. "I'm doing well," I said simply. "Thank you." Rivian leaned her chin into her palm. "Well, of course you say that. But we all worry about you. It must be so stressful, managing whatever it is you do." I could feel the shift, the slow, calculated tightening of the room, like invisible hands on my ribs. They wanted me to react. They wanted a show. They always did. I cut my turkey softly, the knife making the only sound I bothered to offer. "You don't need to worry," I said. "I'm quite comfortable." "Oh, comfortable," Kalian repeated as if it were the punchline of a joke. "Is that what we're calling it?" Alira set her wine glass down and sighed, the kind of sigh designed to say, "Look how hard my life is, raising a daughter like this. I just don't understand why you isolate yourself, Sarah," she murmured, loud enough for the whole table. "We are family. We want to help." Help. They used that word like a blade. Rivian tilted her head. "Yes. If you just talk to us. Let us in again. Like before." Before. My throat went still. Before. When I was the problem. The burden. The scapegoat. Before I realized what I was living in. My fork paused in midair. I wanted to laugh, not because anything was funny, but because of how familiar this all was. The script never changed. Only the setting did. This was the house I bought for them. The walls were mine. The roof was mine. The mortgage, the renovations, the space, all mine. But the narrative? They held that. At least, they believed they still did. And I let them believe it. For now. The room felt too warm. Too heavy. Too staged. Their voices rose again, weaving around me. "Oh yes, Kalian just got promoted. Rivian volunteers at the community board. Such hardworking daughters. We are blessed, truly blessed." A chorus of self-worship disguised as family pride. I sat in silence, not out of weakness, but out of practice. Silence had always been my shield. Because if I spoke, I would tell the truth. And no one at this table had ever wanted to hear the truth. Not when we were children. Not now. Not ever. So I let them talk. I let them laugh. I let them pretend the story hadn't already been written. But inside, I could feel it, the familiar ache of something old and bruised, but no longer bleeding. Not anymore. Because I was not the girl I used to be. And they were about to learn that. Fade to childhood. I didn't start out invisible. Children are not born without place. They are given one. And mine was handed to me by two sisters with matching ribbons and matching smiles, the kind that adults adored and I, even at 6, understood was a performance. Kalian and Rivian. The golden daughters. The sun and the moon. I was the shadow that made their shine brighter. I didn't know that at first. I only knew that whenever something broke, I was blamed. Whenever someone cried, I was scolded. Whenever there was peace, I ruined it, even when I never touched it. I learned young that guilt could be manufactured. That innocence could be erased with a single sentence. That a lie, when told sweetly, became truth faster than the truth ever could. Kalian would point. Rivian would nod. Mother would sigh. Father would agree. And I stood there, small and silent, holding nothing but the weight of a crime I never committed. The first time it happened, I still thought love was unconditional. The last time it happened, I knew better. The memory comes back the same way every time. Not as a story, but as a feeling. A cold hush in a warm room. A stillness that didn't belong to childhood. I was 8 the first time I understood what I was in that house. There had been a vase. A delicate thing. Blue porcelain, floral edges, always kept on the hallway table like a small museum piece. No one touched it. No one dared. Until one afternoon, I came home from school to find it shattered across the floor, petals of ceramic scattered like fallen feathers. And Kalian standing beside it, eyes wide, hands clasped behind her back, the picture of innocence interrupted. Rivian was sitting on the stairs, swinging her legs, humming softly. Waiting. Before I could speak, before I could step forward, before I could even breathe. She did it, Kalian said. Her voice was calm, matter of fact. Like the sky was blue. Like water was wet. Like I broke the vase. I blinked. I just got home. Rivian made a small gasp, the type that sounded gentle, but was designed to catch attention. I saw her, she whispered. She didn't mean to. It just slipped. Her voice was music, soft, trembling, perfectly innocent. Alira rushed in from the kitchen. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't look at the pieces. She looked at me. Oh, Sarah, she said, one palm to her forehead. Why can't you just be careful? There was disappointment in her tone, but also familiarity, as if my guilt was a well-established truth. I didn't. The protest was thin, fragile. I could hear it breaking as it left me. Joran came next. He looked tired, not from work, but from the idea of any conflict that couldn't resolve itself in silence. He sighed. Sarah, apologize. I remember the instinct, the desperate need for fairness, for truth to matter. I didn't do it. Silenced out a cold, heavy silence, the kind that doesn't fill a room, but empties it. Kalian lowered her gaze just enough to look wounded. Rivian bit her lip, like she wished she didn't have to tell on me. Mother shook her head. Father closed his eyes. And I understood. Truth would never win here. Not in this house. Not in this story. Not if the person speaking it was me. So I apologized. Not because I was guilty, but because I was outnumbered. The lessons continued, little by little. The homework switch. I was 10 when my teacher called home to express concern. Sarah hasn't been turning in her assignments, she said. But I had. Every single one. Kalian had learned to slip them out of my school bag. Rivian replaced the neat math sheets with sloppy, scribbled ones. Mother stood in the kitchen with arms crossed. You're trying to humiliate us, she said. Your sisters never have these issues. I stared at the floor, where sunlight touched the tiles but didn't touch me. I did the work, I whispered. Then why doesn't anyone believe you? Rivian asked, soft, curious, as though the cruelty were accidental. And that question stayed. Clung. Stung. Rot. Why doesn't anyone believe you? The answer was devastatingly simple. Because the story had already been chosen. And I wasn't the hero in it. I was the flaw. The inconvenience. The explanation for everything that went wrong. Once a label sticks to a child, it becomes their skin. By 12, I learned to watch them the way prey watches predators. Not with fear, but with awareness. I stopped commenting when things went missing. I stopped explaining when I was blamed. I stopped defending myself when they whispered lies. Every reaction had been used against me. So I gave them nothing. I let my face become a quiet, still surface. Because when water is still, you can see what's reflected in it. and I began to see them clearly. The tilt of Kalian's smile when she knew she had control. The softness of Rivian's voice when she shaped lies like silk threads. The way Alira closed her eyes whenever the truth was inconvenient. The way Joran turned away, not cruel, just cowardly. No one needed to hit me to break me. They broke me with silence. With blame. With the quiet rewriting of reality. But pain, when repeated enough, becomes familiar. Familiar things become predictable. And predictable things can be studied. So I began to collect. Small things at first. A diary. Times, dates, moments, words. Then recordings. Voicemail messages. Copies of assignments. Screenshots. Receipts. Evidence of the things no one believed. The folder began on accident. But once it existed, I understood what I was doing. I was building the thing that would save me later. The thing they would never see coming. But at 12, I didn't know revenge. I only knew survival. I didn't want to destroy them. I just wanted to stop being the villain in a story I didn't write. But families like mine don't allow new narratives. They cling to the version of you that makes them feel righteous. And so they kept framing me. And I kept recording them. Quietly. Carefully. Without reaction. Without warning. Because someday, they would speak. And I would finally have a voice. The first recording wasn't intentional. I was 12, sitting on the carpet of my room, a narrow little space tucked above the garage, where the insulation wasn't great and winter seeped through the walls like a warning. My school gifted every student a small MP3 player that year. Pink, cheap plastic. The kind that cracked if you looked at it wrong. It had a recording function, accidentally tapped if you pressed a button too long. I had left it on my desk, unaware it was recording, when I went downstairs to get a glass of water. That was when I heard them. My sisters. In the hallway outside my door. Their voices floated up the staircase like hummingbirds, delicate, chirping, harmless to anyone who didn't know better. She thinks we like her, Rivian said, giggling, her laughter soft and pretty. Well, she's stupid, Kalian replied, with that effortless grace she coded all cruelty in. Father says we shouldn't let her rely on us. She'll just become a burden. Burden. The word settled in my chest like wet sand. Rivian's voice lowered. Did you see her cry yesterday? When Mother scolded her. Kalian laughed, that bright, ringing laugh she would still be using at Thanksgiving years later. It's so easy, she said. She just breaks. Silence. Then. It makes Mother love us more. Those words split something inside me. Not loudly, not violently. Quietly, like a seam loosening thread by thread. I didn't cry. Not then. I simply stood, walked back to my room, and sat down again. When I picked up the MP3 player later, I heard everything. Their voices. Their intentions. Their joy. I didn't delete it. I didn't even listen twice. I just saved it. And something in me shifted. Not into anger. Not yet. Into clarity. From that day forward, I became very, very quiet. Not the defeated kind of quiet. The strategic kind. I learned to lower my gaze just enough to look harmless. To nod at the right moments. To speak only when spoken to. Not to defend. Not to argue. Not to react. People think silence is weak. Silence is a mirror. And people show you who they are when they think you aren't looking back. I watched Kalian lie and smile in the same breath. I watched Rivian cry without producing a single tear. I watched Alira choose peace over fairness. Every time. And Joran, he simply went where the wind asked him to. The cruelty wasn't always loud. Most of the time it was elegant. A misplaced word. A meaningful glance. A sigh. They spoke in emotional currency. And I became fluent. I started collecting, slowly, quietly, notes in the margins of school agendas. Dates, names, rooms, who said what. Screenshots of conversations on our shared computer. Photos of things before and after they broke themselves. Audio. Always audio, when the house was quiet. Not to destroy them. Not even to expose them. Just to have proof for myself. Because when reality is rewritten around you long enough, you start to doubt your own senses. I needed something to hold in my hands and say, it happened. I am not imagining this. I am not insane. That folder became my anchor. A lighthouse in a home made of fog. One evening I made a mistake, or what looked like one. I left my diary open on my bed. Rivian found it. She read a page aloud to Kalian, laughing behind her hand. She thinks she's suffering, she giggled. As if anything ever happens to her. And I remember standing in the doorway, my face blank, my pulse steady, because I didn't care about the diary. I cared about how they reacted to the diary. Kalian flipped a page and paused, eyebrows lifting. She wrote that we're cruel to her, she said. Rivian leaned in. Well, good. She should know. I realized then. They didn't do what they did because they misunderstood me. They understood perfectly. They just didn't care to know worse. They liked it. Pain was their shared language. And I was fluent because I had no choice. I closed the door gently behind me before they even turned around. Neither of them saw my face. If they had, they might have noticed that I wasn't breaking anymore. I was learning. And that was the moment my childhood ended. Not with shouting. Not with violence. Not with tears. With understanding. Understanding turns pain into purpose. And purpose is the thing that survives. People think cruelty needs to be loud to be real. But the worst kind is quiet. The kind you can't point to. The kind that leaves no bruises. Only explanations. My childhood was made of those explanations. I remember the sound before I remember the sight. A sharp crack, porcelain hitting tile, a gasp that wasn't surprise, but performance. I ran toward the hallway and stopped. Blue shards scattered like frozen petals. Kalian stood framing the scene like a portrait. Hands clean. Face still. Eyes already soft with practiced innocence. Rivian leaned against the wall, her lips curled just slightly. The kind of almost smile you only see if you pay attention. Alira appeared next, her footsteps already heavy with disappointment. What happened? She asked. Not who did this. Not is anyone hurt. Just, what happened? Because the ending was already known. Kalian gestured toward the mess. Sarah. One word. Not loud. Not angry. Just, decided. Mother didn't look at the shards. She looked at me. You just don't think, do you? I wasn't here, I said. I just walked in. The second mistake, explaining. Rivian blinked up at Mother, eyes large, shining. I saw her, Mama. She tripped. I tried to catch it. The concern in her voice. The tremble. I'd seen actors worse than her get awards. Mother sighed, that exhausted sigh that said you're always the problem. Clean it up. And apologize to your sister. Apologize. To the one who framed me. I knelt, hands trembling as I picked up the sharp pieces. But I wasn't crying. Not yet. Kalian crouched beside me, her voice a whisper no one else could hear. Next time, don't be stupid enough to get caught. Then she smiled sweetly and walked away, and I worked hard in school. Not to be praised. Praise didn't exist for me. But because learning was the only place where truth stayed true. Numbers didn't lie. Books didn't shift their memories. Grades didn't care who was beloved. Which is why the betrayal cut deeper. I turned in my assignments. Neatly written. Correct. Quiet pride held close to the chest. Then the phone call came. Mother's voice turned sharp. Your teachers say you haven't submitted anything for 2 weeks. I froze. I have. All of it. Kalian leaned against the counter, biting into an apple as if this were entertainment. Rivian looked up from the kitchen table, all innocence and concern. Maybe she misplaced them, Mama. She forgets things. The implication slid in soft and poisonous. My voice came out then. No. I handed them in. Mother crossed her arms. Sarah. Stop lying. Lying. There it was. The word that rewrote reality. I'm not, I said, and I could feel my throat closing, not from tears, from panic. The panic of being erased. Alira scoffed. Do you hear yourself? Always arguing. Always dramatic. Dramatic. That was the cage. Every protest equals drama. Every truth equals attitude. Every defense equals disrespect. It didn't matter what I said. Their version was already true. I went silent. Not because I accepted it, but because I realized words would never save me. People asked me growing up whether my father was the kind parent. The quiet one. The reasonable one. Let me tell you something. Quiet doesn't mean kind. Quiet is just easy. When the vase broke, he didn't ask questions. When the homework disappeared, he didn't ask questions. When my mother sighed and said Sarah is so difficult, he simply nodded. Joran believed peace mattered more than truth. And peace required a villain. I was the easiest one to choose. He didn't yell. He didn't correct. He didn't defend. He just let it happen. Silence can harm louder than any scream. If I cried, I was overreacting. If I argued, I was disrespectful. If I went quiet, I was cold and ungrateful. There was no correct way to exist. They made sure of that. The goal wasn't fairness. The goal was control. And once a child realizes no version of themselves is acceptable, they learn to disappear. Not physically, emotionally. Piece by piece, I sat on the edge of my bed one night, legs folded beneath me, the moonlight laying itself across the floor like an offering. In my lap, my diary. The only place I was allowed to exist. I wrote, "No one is coming to help me." Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just true. The absence of rescue is a quiet kind of clarity. I put the pen down and stared at the wall. There was no point in explaining. No point in defending. No point in hoping. Love in my house was a performance. A stage. A reward. And I was not cast in the role. So I changed strategy. I would no longer try to win their love. I would watch. I would learn. I would prepare. They wanted me to be small. Fine. Small things go unnoticed. And unnoticed things are free. The vase was the first lesson. Sarah still remembers the sound of it, a delicate glass piece from her mother's wedding set, shattering against the tile floor like it was made of ice. She had been in the hallway reading, her back against the wall. Kalian and Rivian had been playing dress-up in the living room. Everything was ordinary. Then a pause, a look between the two golden daughters, a silent agreement exchanged in a heartbeat. "Sarah!" Kalian called, voice sharp enough to slice air. Their mother appeared almost instantly. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't look around. She didn't inspect the floor or the shoes or the little silk scarf caught under Rivian's heel. She only saw Sarah. "Why can't you be more careful?" Sarah didn't respond. She tried explaining once, long ago, and learned that explanations did not belong to her. So she apologized. For things she didn't do. Again. The homework was next. Sarah stayed up late the night before, carefully writing her answers, sounding out words, and checking every line twice. She was quiet and focused, while Kalian and Rivian whispered and giggled across the room. But in the morning, Sarah's homework wasn't in her backpack. It was the wrong paper, sloppy handwriting, misspelled words, a sheet she had never touched. She knew what happened. She could see her own neat handwriting tucked under Kalian's books. But when she tried to tell her teacher, her voice came out thin. Her teacher sighed, disappointed. "I expected better from you." The room felt too small to hold her humiliation. The whispering was constant, like insects just behind her ear. "She lies. She's jealous. She always wants attention." Her mother believed every word. Her father believed her mother. The Golden Girls would speak softly, just softly enough to sound like truth. And when Sarah tried to defend herself, their mother's voice would slice through the air. "There you go again. Dramatic. Always making a scene." Her father would sigh. Heavy. Tired of her before she even spoke. Sarah learned silence. But silence is not the same as surrender. At 12, something in her changed. Not loud. Not angry. Not blazing. But sharp. She understood, finally. No one would protect her. No one would speak for her. No one would look for the truth. So she would watch. She would listen. She would remember. She would let them think she was breakable. And she would build herself quietly in the shadows they created. This is how a child becomes invisible. And how the invisible learns to see everything. I did not begin collecting evidence because I believed it would save me. I began because I needed something real to hold on to, something that would remind me that my memory was not broken, that I was not imagining what was being done to me. I was 12 the first time I realized that people could rewrite a story while you were still standing inside it, and if you did not have proof, if you did not have something solid that could not be twisted or laughed off, then your voice did not matter. Your experience did not matter. You yourself did not matter. The decision wasn't made in a dramatic moment. There was no slamming door, no vow whispered into a mirror, no tearful promise. It was quieter than that. Almost accidental, the way a plant stretches toward light without consciously deciding to grow. I was sitting at the edge of the upstairs landing while Kalian and Rivian were downstairs in the living room. They didn't know I was there, and I didn't mean to hide, but I had learned to move through the house softly. Soft footsteps, gentle breaths, always unseen unless someone wanted something to blame. They were laughing. Not joyful laughter. Something closer to satisfaction. I remember hearing my name, Sarah. Said the way you say a stain on your shirt, a fly that won't leave your glass, a problem you pretend you are tired of but secretly enjoy complaining about. They were recounting something that had happened that morning, the broken vase in the hallway. I had been blamed instantly because I was nearby, because I was careless, because I had the wrong kind of presence, quiet enough to overlook, but visible enough to assign guilt to. What made me stop breathing was not the accusation. That was normal. It was the story they were building around it. They were practicing how they would tell our mother, rehearsing the tone of injured patience, the sympathetic sigh, the disappointed headshake, the performance of truth. And they were laughing about how easy it would be. She'll cry, Rivian said, in a tone that sounded like warmth if you didn't listen to the edges. She always does. Then she'll apologize even though she didn't do it. Honestly, it's kind of pathetic. Kalian responded in a voice of deliberate carelessness, as though she were discussing the weather. She makes it so effortless. You barely have to try. She hands you the story. I remember pressing my palm against the wooden floorboards because I felt something inside me, something small, shaking, weakening, begin to fold inward. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just listened to them keep laughing. Not because the situation was funny, but because causing harm made them feel powerful, and because power in our house was the only kind of affection that mattered. I didn't confront them that day. Confrontation in my home was never a path to truth, only deeper traps. If I walked downstairs and said, "I heard what you said," they would tilt their heads, soften their eyes, and ask, as though I were fragile and unstable, "Sarah, why are you making things up again?" They would deny, deflect, distort, until the very fact that I had heard anything at all became impossible. So I sat quietly, and in the quiet, something shifted. Not anger. Not yet. Just clarity. If nobody would defend me, then I would simply have to defend myself. Not loudly. Not openly. But thoroughly. The first thing I saved was a voice. It was a small, cheap voice recorder that I found in my father's desk drawer, buried beneath old receipts and pens that no longer worked. It was left over from some meeting he once cared about and forgot. I held it in my hand for a long moment before taking it. I did not feel like a thief. I felt like someone picking up a tool. The next day I used it. There had been an incident at school, a group project missing pages. I knew that I had completed my part. I also knew that Rivian had taken the pages from my binder before class. She had done it casually in the morning while I was brushing my hair in the bathroom we shared, humming a lullaby our mother used to sing. The theft was not about the grade. It was about the story. Sarah can't be trusted with responsibility. She always says she did the work, but you never actually see it. She makes promises she can't keep. I didn't accuse her. I simply pressed record. I set the recorder on my desk at home and pretended to look for the missing pages. I asked her, gently, carefully, evenly, if she had seen them, and then I waited silently, still as a held breath. She laughed. Not cruelly, sweetly, harmlessly, the way she laughed when adults were around. "Oh, Sarah," she said like she was comforting a child. "If you lost your work, just say so. Nobody will be mad. Just admit it." There it was. Manipulation disguised as grace. I didn't argue. I didn't reveal anything. I just nodded, and she smiled like the world made sense again, like the balance of power had been restored. That night, I listened to the recording again and again, not because it was shocking, but because it finally sounded real. It finally existed outside of my mind. It was not my word against hers. It was her voice, her tone. The subtle cruelty softened into concern. The construction of a lie spoken with the ease of breath. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt relieved, as though the air in my lungs had been held for years and finally released. From there, the collection grew. Not all at once. Not hungrily. Not obsessively. Just slowly, the way an old tree acquires rings, one more layer of truth each time someone tried to erase mine. I saved things that most people would throw away. Scraps of notebook paper with changed handwriting, text messages deleted and recovered from old phones, school notes that contradicted their stories, birthday cards where the absence of affection was as telling as any insult. I kept diaries, not the poetic kind meant for future nostalgia, but time-stamped records of cause and effect. When it happened, how it happened, who was present, what they said afterward. I learned to document quietly. I learned to store things in places nobody would look. I learned that silence was not surrender. It was strategy. And because I did not complain anymore, because I did not defend myself anymore, because I stopped crying and stopped asking for fairness, they believed they had one. They believed I had accepted my role as the one who was always wrong, always guilty, always less. They mistook my quiet for weakness, but I was not growing smaller. I was growing precise. By the time I was 14, the folder had become more than paper. It had become a form of memory no one could rewrite. It grew thicker each month, and I kept it hidden beneath the loose back panel of my old wooden bookshelf. That bookshelf had been in my room since I was 6, and the wood was slightly warped near the bottom. If you pressed the edge just right, the board loosened. It was the perfect place for truth to live. There were nights I sat on the floor with the folder open in front of me, listening to the recordings through cheap headphones that always buzzed faintly. I didn't listen to feel pain. I didn't listen to remind myself how alone I was. I listened because the recordings were the only moments where the world felt consistent. The only place where cause and effect aligned. The only space where memory wasn't gaslit into smoke. I paid attention to patterns. Not just what they did, but how and when. Kalian liked to strike when people were watching. Public stages, rooms full of relatives, crowded dinner tables, because she fed on performance. Her cruelty needed an audience. Her lies needed witnesses to anchor them. Rivian preferred intimacy. She thrived in whispered corners, in quiet hallways, in the space between sisters brushing their hair. Her power came from sounding gentle, from appearing patient, from saying things that could always be defended as concern. And my parents? My parents allowed it because it was easier. Because admitting the truth would have meant acknowledging that the daughters they praised and celebrated were not kind. Because loving the wrong children was a wound they would rather live with than face. Because scapegoating a child is simpler than questioning your own role in their suffering. Understanding this did not heal me. It simply clarified the battlefield. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being right when everyone tells you that you are wrong. It is not the loneliness of silence. It is the loneliness of knowing you must remain silent in order to survive. I carried that loneliness the way some children carry backpacks to school. Habitually, unconsciously, heavy without acknowledgement. But something else began to grow alongside it. Not anger. Not revenge. Not even strength. Just awareness. Awareness that I was not helpless. Awareness that observation itself was a form of power. Awareness that survival could be quiet, steady, patient. I was not waiting for the day I would strike back. I did not yet imagine the house, the eviction, the final unveiling. I was simply gathering truth. I began to understand that the only thing more dangerous than someone who is loud about their suffering is someone who is quiet while remembering everything. And I remembered everything. The folder became a part of me. Not because I lived for it, but because it kept me living. It did not give me revenge. Not yet. It gave me certainty. It gave me clarity. It gave me a self that could not be erased. And that quiet, hurting 12-year-old who once pressed her hand to the floorboards so she wouldn't break? She did not disappear. She simply learned to watch. She learned to wait. She learned to grow without being seen. They thought they were shaping me into someone small. They did not realize they were shaping someone patient. And patience, I would later learn, is the sharpest blade a person can carry. There is a particular freedom in being underestimated. I did not understand this immediately. For a long time, being overlooked felt like suffocation, a kind of erasure that left no mark where I should have been standing. When people ignore you, they do not simply fail to see you. They create a version of you that exists only in their convenience, and every time you try to correct them, your voice only makes the lie stronger. So I stopped trying. I let the lie sit. I let it live. I let it become what they needed it to be. If they needed me to be the problem, then I allowed them to paint me that way. If they needed a scapegoat to preserve the illusion of a perfect family, then I handed them the brush. If they wanted to believe I was weak, then I moved softly and made no effort to contradict them, and no one questioned it. Not once. By the time I was 15, the narrative of who I was had already settled so firmly in the house that nobody even checked anymore. If something broke, it was my fault. If someone was upset, I had caused it. If plans went wrong, I had interfered. I no longer flinched when the accusation came. I simply accepted their script with a calm nod and lowered gaze. Not because I surrendered, but because I learned it was easier to let people reveal who they were when they thought you had no resistance left. I let them think they won. That was the first step toward freedom. My days became divided into two lives. At home, I played the role they assigned me. Quiet. Invisible. The girl who was always slightly wrong, slightly disappointing, slightly lesser. Outside, I was building myself. The summer I turned 16, I found work at a small bookstore at the edge of town. It was not a modern chain store. It was the kind of place that smelled of paper and dust and stories that had sat unread for years. The shop owner, a gentleman named Relon, had run the place since before I was born. He moved slowly, spoke little, and treated books the way some people treat heirlooms. He noticed everything, yet judged nothing. When I asked about the job, he simply nodded and said, "Come at opening tomorrow. If you work, you work. If you don't, you won't stay. We'll see." I returned the next day. I stayed. The bookstore became a sanctuary long before it became an education. It was quiet there, but not the tense, suffocating quiet of home. It was a quiet filled with pages turning, pens scratching, inventory lists, the faint ringing of the shop door opening only a few times each hour. People came in because they wanted to be there. People spoke softly because there were things worth hearing. The silence was full, not empty. I learned the order of the shelves. I learned the weight of different bindings. I learned the texture of time passing slowly, without fear. But more than anything, I learned how people look when they believe no one is watching them. There is a certain honesty in the posture of someone browsing a bookshelf. The shoulders soften. The face unguards. Their eyes move without performance, following curiosity rather than expectation. I began to notice patterns. How someone searching for escape paused longest at fantasy. How someone grieving clung to memoirs. How someone uncertain hovered in front of philosophy without ever taking a book down, as though afraid of discovering something true. I watched. I listened. I noted. Not because I wanted to manipulate them. Because understanding people felt like understanding survival. If I could learn what people needed, I could learn what they feared. If I could learn what they feared, I could learn how to avoid being hurt by them. The bookstore taught me that. The second part of my life developed quietly. In the back room of the shop, next to old boxes of unsorted books, was a drawer full of abandoned electronics, old phones, tablets, and small devices people had left behind over the years. I asked once what should be done with them, and Relon shrugged and said, "If they work, we keep them. If they don't, we throw them away." So I began to take them apart. I had no guide, no instructions, no teacher. But machines, unlike people, made sense. When something broke, there was a cause. There was logic. A part was damaged, misplaced, worn, or disconnected. And when you fixed it, the machine worked again. Cause, effect, resolution. No shifting narratives. No accusations that rewrote themselves. No emotional traps. Just truth. Within a year, I could fix nearly anything small. Phone screens. Charging ports. Loose wires. Dead batteries. I started earning small income repairing devices for students and neighbors who would rather pay me than a shop. I kept the work hidden. If my family had known I was becoming competent, they would have taken credit for it. If they had known I was building something of my own, they would have found ways to ruin it. If they had known I was learning independence, they would have tightened the leash. So I let them think I was failing. At home, I kept my voice soft. I let my shoulders slump. I answered slowly, with the practiced flatness of someone defeated. When they spoke sharply to me, I did not react. When they insulted me, I smiled faintly, like someone who agreed. And the more I stopped fighting back, the more confident they became in their cruelty. This is the irony of power. The moment someone believes they have complete control is the moment they stop looking for rebellion. And I was rebelling every day. Silently. Methodically. Patiently. My sisters flourished in their roles. Kalian shone like a star that demanded orbit. She became everything our parents praised. Beautiful, charismatic, successful in ways that required applause. She performed goodness the way an actress performs kindness. Convincingly, gracefully, but only when eyes were on her. She did not need to be cruel constantly. She only needed to be cruel strategically. Rivian, softer and sweeter in voice, grew into a kind of gentle poison. She would approach me in private with such tenderness that, if you had walked into the room at the wrong moment, you would have believed we were close. She would wrap an arm around me, lean her head near mine, and whisper that she only wanted to help me, that I made things hard for myself, that I could be better if I just trusted them more. And then she'd walk away, leaving me with a feeling I could not explain, a feeling of being small in someone else's shadow. Their dynamic was practiced, polished, perfected over years. One struck publicly, the other reinforced privately. And my parents, busy with work and social image, let the balance remain untouched. In their eyes, harmony existed as long as the stories aligned. And the stories aligned because they let my sisters write them. I did not try to correct the narrative anymore. I nodded. I apologized. I accepted blame for things I did not do. I let myself appear incapable. Not because I was defeated, but because I was building a life they would have no belonging in. By 17, I had 3 bank envelopes hidden inside the lining of my winter coat. One held money from the bookstore. One held earnings from repairs. One held emergency cash I never touched except to add more to it. The sums were small, barely enough to matter to anyone else. But to me, they were proof I would leave. Not loudly. Not in anger. Not in dramatic confrontation. Just one day. Gone. They imagined me dependent. I let them think so. I let them believe I would always be the one left at the table while they lived higher, brighter, louder lives. Let them shine. Let them laugh. Let them polish the narrative. The higher people climb on a story built on lies. The farther they fall when the truth arrives. And I always intended to bring the truth. But not yet. Not when I was still soft. Not when I still cried quietly at night. Not when the wounds were still open. Revenge taken in pain is messy. Revenge taken in clarity is transformation. So I waited. I let the story play out exactly the way they needed it to. I let myself become the villain they wanted. The failure. The disappointment. The problem. The weak one. And while they believed in that version of me, I was building the woman who would one day walk out of this house. Without looking back, I used to think the world was small. Not the world itself, but the part of it I believed I was allowed to touch. The neighborhood blocks. The school gates. The cramped living room where I sat at the far end of the sofa, shoulders angled inward to take up less space. The kitchen table where my sisters dominated every conversation, and I learned that silence was quieter when I swallowed words before they formed. I believed that was all I was meant to have, because they trained me to think so. But the afternoon I saw the acceptance email, something cracked open in me, quiet as a breath, but sharp as glass. A light I didn't recognize spilled in. Not joy. Not excitement. Something more dangerous. Possibility. The scholarship was full. Tuition, books, housing. The kind people said, only the gifted or the lucky get. I reread the email 12 times before I believed my eyes. Congratulations, Sarah. My name. My achievement. My future. I didn't scream. I didn't jump. I didn't run to tell anyone. I stood still, hands on the desk, heart steady, like I had been waiting for this exact moment for years. Like I had already known. Because the truth was, I had known. Not in a proud way. Not in a I deserve this way. More like, if I don't get out, I will die here. And my body recognized freedom before my mind did. My mother was in the kitchen when I walked in. She was slicing onions with the same rhythm she used to slice everything. Fast, aggressive, irritated by the existence of the item she was handling. Our sink clogged every 2 weeks because of how much food she forced down it. "Dinner will be late," she said without looking at me. "I got something today," I said. She kept chopping. "I got the scholarship. The one I applied for in the winter. The full one." The knife hit the cutting board harder. Not from surprise. From annoyance. She didn't turn. Just that. A sound. A non-sound. The auditory equivalent of a shrug. I waited. Feet. 2. 3. She didn't even wipe her hands, just walked past me and opened the fridge to get another onion, as if I had just told her the weather. I said nothing, because for years, I had been trained to accept this exact reaction. No praise. No acknowledgement. No warmth. I turned and walked toward the hallway. My father stepped out of his room at that moment, adjusting his watch like he always did before leaving the house. He paused when he saw me. "Dinner late," my mother told him. He grunted. That was their language. Grunts and irritation. I looked at him. "I got the scholarship." He glanced at me. Really looked for about half a second. Then, "You'll still need money." "No," I said. "It's fully covered." He gave a short exhale that was almost a laugh. "Nothing is ever free. You'll see." Then he walked out, that was it. No, "I'm proud of you." No "good job." Not even surprise. Just dismissal. And that was when I realized something. They had already written the story of who I was supposed to be, and they had no intention of changing the script. To them, I would always be the extra child, the inconvenience, the one who should be grateful to take the scraps. Even now. Even when I earned something they couldn't take credit for. Especially then. My sisters found out the next day. They were in the living room laughing over some video on their phones. Leora sprawled across the couch, one leg tossed over the armrest. Vena sitting perfectly upright, hair curled, posture practiced. The picture of a girl who believed the world owed her attention simply because she existed. Our mother must have told them while I was asleep. Because when I walked in, they both looked at me with matching smirks. "Look who got pity funded," Leora said, twirling her hair around her finger. "Aw, they felt bad for you." I didn't respond. I'd learned that silence was the only language bullies can't feed on. "She's so dramatic," Vena added, laughing lightly. "You'd think she cured cancer. It's just charity for smart poor kids." Smart poor kids. I noticed the phrasing. Not smart kids from poor households, but smart poor kids. As if poverty was my identity. As if intelligence and poverty canceled each other out. As if my value depended on who they decided I was allowed to be. I looked at both of them. A long, calm look. And for the first time in years, I felt no fear. Because something had shifted. I wasn't trapped anymore. They just didn't know it yet. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I did not ask them to stop. I walked away. And the silence I left behind wasn't weakness this time. It was goodbye. I began packing that night. Not hurried. Not frantic. Methodical. Clothes. Notebooks. The essentials. My room was small, but it held traces of every insult I had ever swallowed. Every apology I was forced to make. Every time I let them paint me as ungrateful simply because I refused to shrink. I packed slow, because I wanted to remember. Not the pain, but the work. I had survived this place. That meant I could survive anything. The house was quiet. The hum of the refrigerator. The occasional muffled laugh through the wall. My own breathing, steady and certain. I placed the last folded shirt into my bag. Then I reached under the bed, where I kept the folder. The folder that had begun as a joke when I was 11. When I first realized something was wrong. When their lies didn't match their faces. When their words twisted themselves into new shapes every time I asked for clarity. I documented everything, even then. Not because I intended revenge, but because I needed reality confirmed in ink. I needed proof that I wasn't imagining the cruelty. Every insult. Every manipulation. Every instance of sabotage. Every time they framed me to make themselves look righteous. Every time they smiled at me with sweetness. And then turned around smiling sharper. I wrote it down. At 13, the folder gained pictures. Screenshots. Printouts. Recordings. At 16, it grew teeth. Dates. Patterns. Connections. It wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a map. A map of who they really were. And I knew. One day, this would matter. Not as a weapon, but as truth. I slid the folder into my backpack. It fit perfectly. Like it had always been meant to leave with me. I left at sunrise. No note. No announcement. No explanation. No drama. No begging. No goodbye. The streets were still cool. The air still soft. The world still quiet enough that I could hear my own heartbeat. The bus stop was empty. I sat on the bench and waited, watching the light change slowly, sky pale blue to gold to bright. I didn't look back. Not once. Because looking back meant some part of me wanted to stay. And I didn't. Not anymore. When the bus arrived, I stepped on. I took a seat by the window. The city moved around me like a place I was seeing for the first time. People heading to work, street vendors setting up carts, the world already in motion. I felt something I had never felt in all the years I lived in that house. Space. Room to breathe. Room to exist. Room to become. I didn't cry. I thought I would. But there were no tears. Just a calm certainty deep in my chest. This was the first escape. Not the final one. Not the victorious one. But the first. The door opening. The chain unlatching. The boundary dissolving. The moment a caged animal learns the gate was never locked. I leaned back and closed my eyes. And for the first time, I felt free. When I arrived in New York, the very first thing I learned was that the city did not care who I had been before I stepped onto its sidewalks. It did not care that I had spent my childhood shouldering blame that was never mine, or that I had learned to keep my voice quiet to survive. The city had no interest in my past. It only watched to see whether I would stand or fall. The air itself seemed to whisper a challenge. If you believe you are small, you will disappear here. If you believe you can grow, you will. At first, I felt as though I were dissolving into the sheer vastness of it. I had stepped off the bus while clutching one suitcase, my scholarship acceptance letter, and the folder pressed safely inside my coat against my ribs. The noise swallowed me whole immediately. There were taxis shouting with their horns, endless crowds moving as if under some silent shared choreography, neon lights flickering even in the afternoon, as though the city existed in a perpetual theater. I felt like a shadow inside all of it. But that was the beauty of New York. Shadows could choose to stay shadows, or they could gradually step into the light without needing permission. My dorm room was small enough that I could nearly touch both walls if I stretched my arms fully. The mattress was thin, and the radiator made a clanking sound each night that resembled metal bones rattling. I slept lightly, half from habit and half from fear that all of this might evaporate if I closed my eyes too securely. I woke each morning before sunrise. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I was still in the rhythm of always needing to be ahead of consequences before they found me. Classes were difficult, but they made sense to me, which felt strange at first. I had spent so many years being told that I was slow, careless, or incapable of understanding simple things. Yet, when professors spoke, their words formed patterns in my mind that felt almost familiar. I absorbed readings quickly, wrote essays that professors returned with quiet praise handwritten in the margins, and listened to discussions with the silent precision of someone who had trained her entire life to watch carefully before speaking. I did not speak unless speaking was necessary. People assumed shyness, or social anxiety, or simply a lack of desire to participate. But I was listening. Always. Listening had become my most powerful survival skill. New York rewarded anyone who paid attention. To support myself, I worked part-time in a coffee shop near campus. The place was always louder than it needed to be, filled with students who were trying to prove how important they were. I learned to make espresso with smooth confidence, learned the difference between people's genuine voices and their performative ones, and learned that there was a very clear difference between being invisible and being unnoticed. I was no longer invisible here. I was simply choosing not to be seen. It was in that cafe that I met Lysandria, whom everyone called Lisa, though I found myself preferring the full shape of her name and often used it in my mind. She was the kind of person who took up space without trying to do so. Her laugh was warm, her clothing soft and flowing, her presence gentle in the way that sunlight feels gentle when it hits your skin through curtains on a late afternoon. She worked behind the counter with me and did not treat me like a temporary silhouette in the background of her day. The first time she spoke to me with genuine interest, she said, "You move very quietly, but not in a sad way. In a purposeful way. Like you're always thinking." I remember pausing while wiping down a table, my hands stilling over the wood, because it was the first time someone had observed me without layering cruelty or suspicion onto their perception. I did not yet know how to accept kindness without evaluating it for concealed harm, so I simply nodded. But she did not push, and perhaps that was exactly why I trusted her gradually. Over time, she became a constant presence. She did not ask about my family, because she could sense that some doors are better left closed until someone is ready to open them. Instead, she asked questions like, "What colors feel like home to you? Do you ever feel like you hear your own thoughts more clearly when it rains? Do you believe that silence can be a kind of language?" And I replied, slowly, but steadily. During the same period, I met Avon, my cousin, not through family gatherings, because I was no longer included in those, but through merit. He was completing law school in the city, distant from the branch of the family that still entertained holiday gatherings where my absence was barely acknowledged. He was the first relative who did not carry the scent of shared judgment. We encountered one another by coincidence at a university legal clinic event, where I had been seeking advice regarding the legal framework of small business registration. He recognized my name with a flicker of quiet surprise, yet his reaction lacked the familiar sharpness of gossip. Instead, he said, "Sarah, right? I remember you as quiet. Not weak. Just quiet." It was the first time someone had drawn that distinction without needing to be corrected. Avon became my mentor in the careful, structured way that someone becomes a bridge between the world one escaped and the world one is building. He explained legal concepts with patience, not condescension. When I asked questions, he listened as though my thought process mattered. When he realized I understood quickly, he adjusted his pace without fanfare. With Lisa, I learned emotional stability. With Avon, I learned structural power. With New York, I learned movement, anonymity, resilience, ambition. Meanwhile, I studied late into the nights. I worked every spare hour I could. I applied for small grants, freelance projects, and competitions that offered tiny sums of money, each of which I saved meticulously. I began to build relationships with professors and community contacts, not socially, but professionally, with the quiet steadiness of someone assembling a foundation brick by brick. By the end of my first 2 years, I had discovered a skill I had not known I possessed. I understood systems. I understood how businesses formed, how needs turned into markets, how people made decisions about trust and value. I could see how something small could be scaled into something influential, if guided with patience and stability. My first business was a modest consulting service for students who needed help organizing their workloads, preparing applications, or structuring research projects. I did not advertise loudly. I let results speak. And results traveled faster than any marketing campaign ever could. Word spread quietly through academic circles. I charged fair rates, but I did not undervalue myself. Within a year, what had been extra income became enough to sustain me fully. The scholarship covered tuition. The consulting covered living costs. And the savings grew. Steadily. Consistently. I tracked every dollar with the precision of someone who had once counted coins under dim lamplight in a childhood bedroom filled with whispered accusations and forced apologies. By the time I graduated, my consulting service had expanded into a small but deeply trusted network. Clients recommended me to their organizations, which referred me to colleagues, which led to greater contracts. I formalized the business with Avon's guidance, structuring it legally and financially with clean documentation, transparent accounting, and strategic growth. I rented my first apartment, a small but sunlit place in a quiet neighborhood where the buildings were lined with brickwork and trees that shifted colors in the fall. I chose the apartment not for convenience, but for peace. I furnished it slowly, buying things only when they felt right, never rushing, never cluttering, never filling space simply to fill it. That apartment felt like breathing. For a while, I thought that would be enough. I thought building a life for myself separate from the one that had wounded me might allow everything to settle into a quiet balance. I believed in healing through distance. I believed that space could soften the memory of cruelty. But memory is not softened by distance when the wound has roots. It was during an evening when I sat near the window, watching the city lights flickering like faraway stars reflected in water, that the thought came to me. What if they could live comfortably too? What if comfort could create change? What if healing could be shared instead of divided? I bought the house because I genuinely believed love could still be built. I bought it because I thought that if they no longer had to fight for attention, resources, validation, or emotional foothold, then cruelty might have no soil left to grow in. I bought it because I believed that family, once given a gentle way forward, might choose to take it. The house was large, warm, and filled with light from wide windows. It had enough rooms that no one would need to compete. It had a garden where mornings felt like safety and evenings felt like closure. I walked through it the day I signed the deed, and I could almost see a peaceful version of my family living there, sharing meals, acknowledging one another without sharpness or rivalry. I truly believed, with every careful breath I took that day, that peace could be chosen. I was wrong. Because one thing I had not yet learned was this. People who build themselves on top of someone else's suffering do not stop simply because the suffering is no longer necessary. They do not know who they are without the person they chose to scapegoat. They do not know how to love without first diminishing the person receiving it. I gave them comfort, and in return, they filled it with the same cruelty that had raised them. And it was then, standing in the quiet hallway of that house, hearing their laughter echo with the same sharpness as before, that I realized something essential. I had not escaped them. I had only changed the scenery of the cage. But this time, they had no idea who I had become. And that was the difference that would change everything. When my family moved into the restored historic house, they behaved as though they were returning to a kingdom that had been waiting for them. The house had once belonged to an elderly couple who kept it in careful condition but had not modernized it. I spent months overseeing the restoration with quiet attention, choosing gentle colors, warm wood finishes, and soft lighting that felt like a calm breath. I wanted a place that did not echo with raised voices. I wanted a home that sounded like mourning and forgiveness. I wanted warmth. My family treated it like a stage. On the day they arrived, Kaylian swept through the front door first, her movements large and performative, the way someone walks when they believe eyes are already watching. She paused dramatically in the entrance hall and said, "Oh, it has potential," in the same tone someone would use when evaluating a fixer-upper rather than a home that had been rebuilt piece by piece with care. Her voice carried up the high ceilings, and it already changed the sound of the space. I had imagined their voices would soften here, but instead, the house began to bend around them. Rivian arrived next, trailing scented perfume and an expression that suggested she had been expecting something more extravagant. She brushed her fingertips along the stair railing without appreciation, only evaluation. "It's cute," she said, and somehow she spoke the word in a tone that made it feel like an insult instead of a compliment. She opened her mouth to say something else, but her gaze had already drifted toward the room she wanted to claim. My mother walked in after them, her hands folded together as if she were attending a ceremony. She looked around and nodded once, the same way she would nod when accepting something she believed she deserved. My father was last, stepping inside with heavy shoes still dusty from the yard, leaving a trail across the wooden floors I had polished only days earlier. He did not notice. He did not look down. He looked only at the walls, as if searching for a flaw. I stood near the doorway, watching them settle into the space as though they had been given something owed. They did not ask where they should put their things. They did not ask which rooms were meant for whom. They simply walked. Claimed. Declared. Occupied. Kalian took the master bedroom. Rivian took the sunniest guest room. My mother and father took the two largest rooms downstairs. They did not ask where I would be staying. They simply assumed I would adjust myself around them. In the days that followed, the house shifted in ways that felt subtle from the outside but heavy from within. The gentle light I had loved became harsh under their evaluations. My mother began replacing the decor I had chosen, piece by piece, without speaking to me. Throw pillows I had selected for their soft earth tones were replaced with patterns of gold and burgundy she believed looked more impressive. The linen curtains were taken down because she insisted that heavier drapes would make the house feel expensive. Even the plants I had chosen for the windowsills, quiet green leaves that made the mornings feel alive, were pushed aside in favor of silver-coated artificial arrangements that didn't require maintenance. The house was becoming theirs, not because they needed shelter, but because they needed dominance. They hosted relatives within the first week. I found out only when I walked into the kitchen and saw my aunt pouring tea into one of the ceramic mugs I had brought from my first apartment. She looked up at me with polite confusion. "Oh," she said. "I thought this was your parents' house." The words were innocent in tone, but the implication was already moving through the family network. Kalian had told them the house was purchased through family savings. Rivian had told them I was staying there temporarily out of necessity. My mother had apparently told at least 3 different relatives that she had helped me get back on my feet. No one ever said I bought the house for them. My father said to my uncle in the living room, "We don't want Sarah to feel like a guest. She just needs guidance right now." And my uncle nodded, offering me a sympathetic look, as though I were fragile, dependent, grateful for their charity. I realized that their narrative had already begun before I even noticed. They moved through conversations like choreographers, arranging tone and implication so carefully that each life felt like it belonged there. They told everyone that I was the one they had opened their home to. They told everyone that I was recovering. They told everyone that I was lucky. And everyone believed them. Because my silence was familiar. I did not correct anyone. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. Not yet. I watched instead. I wrote down dates, words, behaviors. I noted who said what and to whom. I watched how they shaped reality when they thought no one else saw the seams. There is a difference between being silent because you have no voice and being silent because you are choosing to observe the battlefield before stepping onto it. They mistook my silence, as they always had, as weakness. But silence is a study. One evening, I walked past my mother's room and heard her on the phone with a cousin. She spoke in a low voice, but the house carried sound easily. "Yes," she said, "it's been exhausting. She has always needed supervision. She doesn't understand how to live properly on her own. We're doing what we can." My cousin's voice floated back faintly through the speaker. My mother sighed, heavy, martyr-like. "Yes. We've opened our home to her, of course. Family comes first." My chest did not hurt. Not anymore. The pain had already become something else. Something steadier. Something that burned clean. Down the hall, I heard Kalian and Rivian laughing loudly. They were telling a story that I recognized only in fragments, because the story was about me, but changed. In their version, I had been difficult, sensitive, dramatic, selfish. They spoke as though they had endured me, as though they had raised me, as though they had saved me from myself. They were rewriting history in real time, confident that everyone would believe them because they always had before. But this time something had changed. The house had security cameras. The living room had a microphone system I had installed for voice-activated lighting. My phone recorded easily even from my pocket. Lisa had taught me how to extract audio cleanly. Avon had taught me how to authenticate recordings legally. I was not the child they had trained to stay small. I was the archive they didn't know existed. So I watched. I recorded. I collected. Just as I had all those years ago. Except now I knew exactly what I was collecting evidence for. Because peace is not always the absence of conflict. Sometimes, peace is the patience to wait for the right moment to speak. And I was waiting. Not for revenge. Not for spectacle. Not for the pleasure of watching them fall. I was waiting for the moment when the truth would be undeniable and witnessed. The moment when silence would no longer protect them. The moment when I would stand, Not to plead, not to explain, not to justify, but simply to stop being the version of me they could control. They believed they were reshaping the house into something that belonged to them. They did not realize the house was already watching them with me. And everything they said inside its walls was already recorded. The quiet was no longer submission. It was preparation. And I had learned long ago, the one who watches longest sees deepest. Thanksgiving arrived wrapped in the kind of cold that made the windows shiver, a quiet frost gathering at the corners of the glass as though winter was trying to peer inside. The house smelled like roasted garlic, cinnamon, baked yams, and the faint tang of polished silver. The chandeliers glowed softly, bathing the dining room in warm gold light that looked beautiful in photographs, but somehow made the air feel sharper in person, as if the brightness only served to reveal the things nobody wanted to see. The long dining table stretched nearly from one wall to the other, covered in linen as pale as early morning fog. Crystal water glasses stood beside wine glasses, each plate accompanied by a folded cloth napkin in a shade of soft maroon. It was a dinner meant to look elegant, classy, united, festive. A family bound together by love and memory. And yet, despite the beauty, it felt like something was waiting beneath the surface. Something coiled. Something familiar. Sarah sat at the far end of the table near the corner, where the dimmer light cast softer shadows. Everyone else had taken seats closer to the center, clustering in little circles of conversation and laughter. Not once had anyone looked toward her seat when choosing their own. They simply assumed, as they always did, that her place was wherever there was least importance. Beside her, the chair was empty. The cushion remained unpressed, untouched. She did not mind. She had long ago learned the value of silence and space. Distance was not always punishment. Sometimes it was sanctuary. Kalian, dressed in a soft cashmere sweater, the color of ivory, and wearing pearls like a statement of inherited grace, was telling a story to the table. Her voice projected easily, sweet but edged, the way sugar might crystallize into something sharp. Rivian, her posture impeccable, nodded beside her, adding small comments at precisely the right moments. They looked like a pair carved from the same mold, articulate, poised, always aligned. Sarah watched them from her place, hands folded gently in her lap. The candles flickered a warm glow across her face, but her eyes remained steady, observant. She was not shrinking. She had learned long ago that shrinking gave them too much satisfaction. Everyone was laughing now, except Sarah. The laughter felt off. It was brittle, the kind of laughter that did not come from joy but from performance. A chorus meant to keep the atmosphere bright, or to hide something darker. Her mother sat across the table, smiling in that familiar, placid way, the same smile she'd used when Sarah was small and crying after being blamed for something she did not do. It was the smile that said, "I don't believe you, but I won't say it. I don't need to. I already chose my side." Her father was already on his second glass of wine. His expression was relaxed, bordering on smug. He leaned back in his chair as if the world had unfolded exactly as it should, point two beautiful, accomplished daughters at his side, and Sarah, a shadow in the corner. The meal began with toasts. Her uncle lifted his glass. "To family," he declared, smiling broadly. "To family," everyone repeated, except Sarah, who simply lifted her glass and placed it back down without drinking. Her silence was not defiance. It was simply that the word family had never included her. Conversations swelled around the table. Stories about work promotions, upcoming weddings, business opportunities, plans for vacations. The air swam with pride and mild competition and carefully curated narratives. Sarah listened, nodding when appropriate, speaking only when directly addressed, and even then, never more than needed. She was used to being seen but not heard. But Kalian was not content to leave her invisible. She never had been. "So Sarah," Kalian said, her voice light, pleasant, with a sharp hook buried inside it. "What have you even been doing lately? I feel like you're always busy doing something, though no one ever actually knows what it is." The table quieted, just enough to draw attention. Sarah did not look up immediately. She took a sip of water first, slow, controlled, letting the silence stretch into something uncomfortable for everyone but herself. Then she answered, voice steady, gentle, unbothered. I've been working, running my business, maintaining the house. The usual. Rivian laughed, soft, dismissive, perfectly timed. Oh right, that little business. The one that just barely breaks even. You really do try though. It must be exhausting. Her mother shook her head as though in mild embarrassment. Her father exhaled through his nose in that condescending way he always did. A cousin murmured, I heard she only got clients because people felt sorry for her. Her aunt whispered to her uncle, not as quietly as she thought, she always was a bit needy, wasn't she? The words floated, lingered, settled. Sarah kept her face calm. She had learned long ago that reacting was the trap. They wanted a scene. They wanted her to defend herself, because defending herself made her look defensive, and being defensive made her look guilty. So she sat still, silent. Kalian smiled sweetly, now that she had the room's attention. We're just worried about you, she continued. You know, because you're always so fragile. Always taking things the wrong way. Always imagining problems. We just want you to be better. Rivian nodded with an expression of false sympathy. Yes. I mean, we love you, of course. But you do make things difficult. You always have. And Thanksgiving should be about honesty, right? There it was. The performance. The painted kindness layered over cruelty. The slow burn humiliation they always choreographed so beautifully. Her father set down his fork. Your sisters are right, he said, as though he were delivering some wise verdict instead of participating in a spectacle. You always were dramatic. You read too much into things. You create tension where there doesn't need to be any. Sarah could feel dozens of eyes on her. She felt none of them. She looked up slowly, her gaze moving from one face to another, calm as still water. The flicker of candlelight reflected in her eyes like something quietly burning there, something unseen. She placed her napkin gently beside her plate. The table held its breath. But she did not defend herself. She did not argue. She did not cry. She did not remind them who bought the house, who paid the bills, who made their comfort possible. She simply said, in a voice as steady as earth, Thank you for your honesty. The room stilled. For a moment, a single, suspended moment, the performance faltered. Kalian blinked. Rivian shifted in her chair. Her father frowned, as though he understood something was changing but could not yet place what it was. Her mother's glass paused midway to her lips. Sarah stood, excused herself with perfect politeness, and left the table without a single backward glance. She was not defeated. She was simply done. And none of them realized. The recording device in her pocket had captured every word. The dining room was still humming when Sarah stepped back into the doorway, though the warmth that had filled the air earlier had thinned into something tighter, thinner, almost fragile. Conversations had begun again after she left the table, but they were quieter now, uneven, as though everyone sensed they had pushed further than usual and did not know how to justify the discomfort now floating above the plates of half-finished turkey and cranberry sauce. The chandelier's golden light, once soft and welcoming, now seemed too bright, illuminating every strained smile and cautious glance. Sarah's footsteps were soundless against the wooden floor as she resumed her place at the table. She did not look at anyone in particular. She sat, folded her napkin precisely across her lap, and reached for her glass of water. The cool touch of the glass steadied her fingers, though she did not need steadying. She had steadied herself years ago. For several long moments, there was only the clattering of forks, the quiet murmur of conversations tiptoeing around what had just occurred. Kalian and Rivian resumed their show. Laughter too loud, smiles too polished, eyes flicking towards Sarah every so often as if ensuring she noticed the performance. Their mother spoke about seasonal sales at a luxury boutique. Their father praised a business colleague's son. A cousin asked about travel plans to Italy. The room was working hard to pretend that nothing uncomfortable had ever happened. Then it happened. A single sharp vibration cut through the air, brief, almost gentle. Then another. And another. Then a chorus. A ripple of buzzing phones, screens blinking awake in hands, pockets, purses, table edges. The sound rolled through the dining room like the first tremor of a quake. Everyone paused. People glanced down. And then the silence hit. It was not a natural silence. It was the kind that arrives suddenly, heavy and absolute, like a room inhaling and forgetting how to breathe. Several phones dropped slightly. Someone whispered, What is this?" Her uncle frowned, adjusting his glasses. Her aunt blinked twice as though the words on her screen refused to make sense. Her mother's eyebrows drew together slowly. Her father's jaw tightened. Kalian's smile froze. Rivian's hand went completely still around her wine glass. On every screen, the notification read, 30 days notice to vacate, property transfer complete. The words glowed in the hush. A legal document attached. Time-stamped. Verified. Not a warning. Not a request. A decision. Her father broke the silence first, his voice sharp, cutting, too loud for the stillness. "What is this supposed to mean?" Sarah did not flinch. She watched him with the same expression someone might wear while watching a familiar play unfold exactly as scripted. Her mother was already turning toward her, disbelief coiling into something acidic. "Is this a mistake? Tell me this is some kind of clerical error." Kalian's voice cracked, not dramatically, but in a way that revealed her throat had gone dry. "Sarah, what did you do?" Rivian stood up so quickly her chair scraped across the floor, the sound jarring in the stunned quiet. "This isn't funny." Multiple relatives began speaking at once now, voices overlapping, rising, swelling. "You can't do this. This house is ours. We have rights. We live here. Where are we supposed to go? This is your family. Explain yourself." The air grew chaotic. Confusion, denial, anger, disbelief, all crashing together like waves against the same rock. Sarah did not raise her voice. She did not even shift in her seat. She simply stood. And the room fell silent as if someone had pressed a hand to its throat. Her presence was not loud, not forceful, not physically imposing. But silence carries a weight when someone has lived a lifetime inside of it. She had spent years learning how to take up space without asking permission. She let the silence stretch, not cruelly, but with purpose. She waited for every eye to turn toward her. She waited until every heartbeat in the room seemed to thrum with the same question. "What have you done?" Only then did she speak. "The house," she said, her voice calm and low, "was never yours." Her father's face reddened. "We are your parents. This is our home." "No," she interrupted, still gentle but leaving no space for his voice to dominate. "This house was purchased legally under my name alone. The deed was always mine. I paid for it. I maintain it. I handle every expense. You moved in because I let you. That was generosity, not obligation." Her mother's voice trembled. "We thought you wanted us here." Sarah blinked slowly, thoughtfully. "I wanted peace." Kalian scoffed, almost hysterical in her disbelief. "You're kicking your own family out? During the holidays? Who does that? What kind of person?" "A person who has been used," Sarah replied. Rivian took a sharp breath, not in guilt, not in remorse, but in offense. "I can't believe you're acting like a victim again." Sarah continued as if she hadn't spoken at all. "I have listened to every insult, every dismissal, every lie, every performance meant to make me look small or selfish or broken. I have allowed it because I wanted to understand what you believed you were entitled to. I understand now." Her father pointed a finger at her, something harsh igniting in his eyes. "You owe us respect." Sarah finally met his gaze. "No," she said, not cold, simply true. "I owe you nothing." The room stilled. Sarah reached into her pocket. Slowly, calmly, deliberately, she placed her phone on the table and tapped the screen. The audio began to play, clear, crisp, undeniable. Kalian's voice. She only got that scholarship because people felt sorry for her. Rivian's voice. "It's embarrassing, really. She'll never be anything." Her father's voice. "She should be grateful we tolerate her at all." Her mother's voice. "She is exhausting. Always has been." Silence. No one breathed. No one blinked. No one could pretend anymore. The truth was not loud. The truth simply existed. Sarah picked up her napkin, folded it, and set it beside her plate with careful grace. "You have 30 days, she said. "Use them well." She stepped away from the table. No one followed her. They did not understand yet, not fully, that this was not the end. It was only the notification. The unraveling had only just begun. The dining room felt colder now, though no window had been opened. It was the kind of cold that slips into a room when something unspoken rises to the surface and settles itself in the very air, waiting to be acknowledged. The kind that makes people sit straighter without knowing why, makes hands tremble when trying to hide the trembling, makes the silence ache. No one moved. No one spoke. They were still processing the legal notice that had just dismantled the comfort they believed permanent. But I had not spoken everything that needed to be spoken. I had not yet shown them the truth, not the whispered accusations, not the emotional bruising disguised as family, not the years that had shaped me while they assumed I was simply absorbing and absorbing and absorbing. This moment required precision. I stepped away from the table only long enough to retrieve what I had kept hidden in plain sight for years. The folder. It was not remarkable to look at. A simple black binder, worn slightly at the edges, the corner reinforced with clear tape from where I had once dropped it during a move. It looked like something that could belong to anyone, filled with tax documents or academic papers or recipes someone planned to try one day. It did not look like the weight of 2 decades of memory. It did not look like survival. When I returned to the table, every pair of eyes followed me. Kalian's expression flickered from confusion to suspicion to something almost brittle. Rivian's smile, always so smooth, so careful, so sweet when she wanted to be, faltered entirely. My mother inhaled sharply, as though she recognized the object on instinct. My father's jaw tightened in the shape of a warning he did not yet know how to deliver. I placed the folder on the table. Not loudly. Not with force. I laid it down the way you lay down a truth that does not need to shout to be undeniable. I want you to understand, I said, my voice steady even. This didn't begin today. This did not begin with the house, or the scholarship, or the stories you told about me to relatives and neighbors and anyone who would listen. This began long before that. No one interrupted. I opened the folder. The soft click of the binder rings releasing sounded louder than it should have, as if the room had nothing else to listen to. The first page was a printed transcript. Their voices, not mine. I pressed play. The audio filled the room, clear and sharp, leaving no room for denial, no corners to hide behind. Kalian's voice. She needs to be knocked down. She gets too confident sometimes. Rivian, laughing softly. She's pathetic. Just smile at her, and she thinks it means something. There was no anger in their voices. No hesitation. Just casual cruelty. The kind people practice enough times to forget it is cruelty at all. My mother's voice entered next, quieter, but sharper. Sarah can handle pain. She always has. She'll adjust. My father's voice answered, firm, self-assured, the tone of someone convinced they were molding something, not eroding it. Don't defend her. She needs to learn humility. Someone in the room gasped. Maybe an aunt. Maybe a cousin. Maybe someone who had always suspected, but chose silence because silence was easier than truth. No one moved. My mother's hands were flat against the table now, fingers rigid, as though holding herself together physically was the only option she had left. My father stared at the folder the way a person might stare at a mirror that finally reflects them accurately. My sisters, the golden girls, who had always shined brightest when I was placed in shadow, looked suddenly dull in the light of their own words. I continued, not because I needed to explain, but because the truth deserved to be spoken aloud. This is not everything, of course. I didn't record every day. Not every lie. Not every moment where I was blamed to protect your pride or your performance or your version of the story. But I recorded enough. I turned the page. Photos. Messages. Printouts of chat logs. Screenshots of group conversations where my name had been the punchline. Notes in my handwriting. Small, precise, dated carefully. The broken vase. The missing homework. The lost necklace. The cousin who refused to speak to me for 8 years because of a rumor whispered at a family wedding. The teacher who looked at me differently because of something my mother said on a parent call. Piece by piece. Not to accuse, but to reveal. I gave you chances, I said softly. I gave you more chances than I can count. I waited for you to grow. I waited for you to recognize yourselves. I bought you home because I believed that maybe love could be chosen the second time, even if it was denied the first. My mother's eyes were wet now, but she did not cry. My mother did not cry unless it would benefit her. And my father's posture had changed, shoulders lowered, chest no longer expanded, as though a lifetime of authority had slipped off him in the space of a breath. Kalian finally spoke. Her voice was thin, cracking in the places where certainty used to live. We didn't think. It was just how things were. I nodded. That is exactly the problem. Rivian shook her head, no tears, just disbelief that the world she built could be seen for what it was. You're making it sound worse than it was. Families argue. Siblings fight. You're overreacting. I looked at her. Not angrily, just truthfully. You can only call something an overreaction if you know the appropriate amount of pain. She went silent. The room held its breath. I closed the folder gently, pressing my hand over the cover for a moment, not to contain it, but to acknowledge it. I bought you a life where we could grow again, I said, my voice softer now, almost sad. But you chose to repeat the story. They all looked at me then, not at the folder, not at the evidence, not at the past. At me. And for the first time in my entire life, they saw me. Not the scapegoat. Not the placeholder for blame. Not the shadow that made their brightness meaningful. Just me. And I was not small. I let the silence sit with them. Because the truth was not finished. But I was. I reached for the folder, closed it, and lifted it from the table. My voice was quiet, steady, clean, unburdened. I am done carrying this. Now you can carry yourselves. And I walked away. Not triumphant. Just free. The living room had never felt so full of silence. Not the ordinary kind that comes after a conversation pauses. This was the kind that settles heavy, like dust in an abandoned place, the kind that makes every object in the room suddenly visible in ways it never was before. The framed photos on the walls, the flowers arranged in vases, the soft blankets draped over couches, they all looked like props now. Beautiful, comfortable, curated things meant to suggest warmth where warmth did not exist. I remained standing. I did not pace. I did not move toward anyone. I simply let the quiet settle until the room had no choice but to face it. My father was the first to speak, though his voice came out lower than usual, stripped of the authority he wore like a coat. Sarah, he said, my name slow on his tongue. This has gone too far. I met his gaze, and this time, I did not look away. No, I said gently. This is the first time it has gone exactly as far as it needed to. My mother's breath hitched, the sound of someone who was beginning to realize that the ground they stood on might not be ground at all. She pressed her fingers to her lips, but she didn't speak. She didn't know what to say. Kalian came next, her voice thin, crackling with the panic of someone who has never imagined themselves powerless. You can't just put us out. We live here. We have lives here. I let her finish because interrupting her would have felt too familiar, too much like the way they always interrupted me. When she fell quiet, I spoke slowly. The house was never the gift. They all stared at me, confusion flickering, then fear, then something hollow. I walked toward the dining table and placed my hand lightly on one of the chairs, not to hold on to it, but to anchor the moment. I bought this house, I said, because I believed, truly believed, that if I gave you comfort, stability, beauty, space to breathe, a home without struggle, maybe we could start again. I thought love was something you could grow if the soil was good enough. My mother cried then, a small sound, not the dramatic kind she used when there was an audience. A real sound. Raw. Frightening in its honesty. I didn't stop her. I didn't comfort her. Not out of cruelty, but because I was done being the bandage for wounds I did not create. You believed the house was yours, I continued, because you believed I was yours. Someone to scold, someone to dismiss, someone to reshape into something you could approve of. But I am not something you own. And I am not the problem you made me into. My father's voice returned, but this time it was quiet, bewildered, almost lost. So all of this, all these years, you were keeping score? I shook my head. No. I was surviving. And there is a difference. My sisters stood on either side of the room, as if distance from one another might soften the truth. But truth does not soften for distance. It travels. Kalian's voice cracked again as she tried to hold on to the version of reality where I was still the unstable one. You're doing this because you're hurt. Because you want to punish us. I'm doing this, I said, because I finally understand that peace cannot exist where I am not respected. Rivian stepped forward then, and for a moment, I saw not cruelty, but fear. The fear of losing a certainty she never questioned. We can try again, she said. We can talk. We can fix this. I looked at her, really looked, and realized something quietly devastating. She believed her words. She believed that talking would undo decades of intentional silence, that apologies could erase the scaffolding of superiority she had lived inside since childhood, that we could return to a story in which I accepted the role of background character so she could remain radiant. We cannot fix something you do not believe you broke, I said softly. She froze. Because there it was. The truth. I stepped back. I exhaled. I am not leaving this house. My voice did not rise. It did not tremble. I spoke as someone who had already lived the grief and survived it. You are. The words moved through the room like a slow wind passing through curtains, soft, undeniable, final. My mother began to cry harder, the sound folding in on itself. My father did not speak at all. Kalian's face crumpled, not into guilt, but into horror at the realization that the world had shifted without her permission. Rivian whispered, barely audible. You're choosing yourself. I nodded. Yes. No one spoke after that. The silence returned, but this time, it was a silence that belonged to me. I felt the weight of my own presence in the room, not heavy, but grounded, true, whole. My voice, when it came next, was steady and gentle, the way someone speaks once they have already grieved the loss. I finally choose myself. I did not stay to watch them break. I did not soothe. I did not explain again. I did not shrink. I left the room, and for the first time in my life, no one followed me. The house felt different once they were gone. Not suddenly. Not with the dramatic sweep of a closing door or the echo of footsteps down a walkway. It changed slowly, the way seasons do, the way grief fades, the way the human heart softens when it is finally allowed to breathe. The air felt lighter. The rooms seemed wider. The walls no longer hummed with tension, whispered accusations, or sharp glances exchanged behind half-closed doors. The silence was no longer heavy. It was restorative. For the first time in years, Sarah could hear her own heartbeat clearly beneath her ribs, steady and deliberate and alive. The town was quiet around her, as it always had been. A place tucked between cedar-thick hills and moss-softened trails where mist clung to the morning like a gentle shawl and the air smelled of wet leaves and pine sap. The kind of place where neighbors waved but did not intrude, where the mountains felt close enough to touch and the river that cut through the valley carried away more than water. It carried noise, expectations, the past. After they left, Sarah spent the first week simply existing, not filling the space with rearranging, not scrubbing away signs of them, not erasing, just being. She would wake when the light rose pale and blue over the ridge and filled her bedroom with a soft glow that felt safer than anything had ever felt in her childhood home. She would brew tea slowly, without anyone commenting on how quiet she was, how inconvenient it was that she preferred silence in the morning. She would sit at the kitchen table and look out at the yard where the pine trees swayed gently, and she would not think about whether someone was behind her, judging the angle of her shoulders or the pace of her breathing. The house had space now. Not just physical, psychic, emotional, generational. The kind of space that does not come from absence, but from release. She walked through each room deliberately, not to inspect, not to claim, but simply to acknowledge. The living room where Kalian used to toss her coat carelessly over the back of the couch and sigh loudly, making sure everyone noticed how tired she was. The dining room where Rivian had enjoyed playing the hostess, though she contributed nothing to the food, nothing to the effort, only to the performance. The hallway where Alira once practiced speeches for school ceremonies while insisting that Sarah's silence was resentment rather than restraint. The small alcove where Joran would scold, not in anger, but in weary disappointment, The kind that implies that the person being spoken to has already failed before the conversation begins. Sarah touched none of it. She simply looked and let it settle. Not as wounds, but as history. The notifications came gradually. The first was from Kalian. A message that was not an apology at first glance, but rather something shaped like apology if one squinted, if one wanted to believe. It arrived late at night, which already told Sarah enough. People only apologize after dark when guilt has managed to corner them. The message began with rambling context, how stressful everything had been, how she had been overwhelmed, how her emotions sometimes got the better of her, and how she felt misunderstood. Then a single trembling line appeared near the bottom. I didn't realize how much you were holding. I didn't know. I should have known. Sarah read it 3 times. Not because she doubted its meaning, but because she was not looking for meaning anymore. Apologies are not measured in words. They are measured in change. She did not respond. Not because she was angry. Not because she wanted revenge. But because engaging would reopen a road she had walked to its very end. She had already arrived where she was supposed to be. The next silence came from Rivian. Not an apology. Not even a sentence. Simply disappearance. She left the family group chat, the cousins chat, the old school friends chat where she used to parade achievements and complaints with equal grandeur. She did not message Sarah because what could she possibly say? There are people who can apologize, and there are people who can only run. Sarah did not chase her. She no longer chased anyone. Alira sent long paragraphs. Emotional confessions. Childhood recollections. Attempts to rewrite memory into something gentler, something softer, something that hurt less to acknowledge. Guilt is a quiet predator. Once it sinks its teeth in, it does not easily let go. She wrote about the house, about the meals, about the arguments, about the way they all learned to treat Sarah the way the others did because it was easier to blend into cruelty than to stand against it. She wrote that she didn't know how to fix anything, but she wanted to try. Sarah read those too. She did not reply to those either. Not out of coldness, but because healing is not a conversation. It is a shift in gravity. And Sarah could not return to the orbit of people who had once required her to abandon herself in order to belong. Joran called. Not once. Many times. His voice, when it reached her voicemail, was calm at first, then tired, then heavy. He spoke as though speaking to himself, or perhaps to the memory of the daughter he once had but never truly saw. He spoke about the house, about family, about legacy. He spoke of regret in the manner of someone who believed regret itself was enough. He never said he was sorry. Not directly. Some people believe that honesty is the same as apology. It is not. Sarah did not pick up. Not because she wanted to punish him, but because she had nothing left to prove. 3 weeks passed in this quiet. The rain eased in and out of the valley, soft and constant, the way Oregon rain often is, more of a presence than a weather pattern. The air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. The trees shimmered in silver veils each morning when Sarah walked to the porch with her cup of tea. It was on one of those mornings that Lisa arrived. She did not knock. She simply walked up the porch steps and sat down next to Sarah as though she had always belonged there. The two of them sat in silence for a long time. Lisa's presence was not demanding. She did not ask for explanations. She did not ask if Sarah was all right. She did not offer platitudes or advice or concern disguised as guidance. She simply existed in the same space, with a steadiness that felt like companionship rather than intrusion. The porch overlooked the valley. The river shimmered in the distance, reflecting the early light like a long ribbon of silver glass. The mountains rose in layered shades of evergreen, deep and endless. Birds moved through the sky in slow arcs, rhythmic, unhurried. The entire landscape breathed. Sarah exhaled. Not a sigh. A release. The kind of release that comes when the body no longer believes it must defend itself to survive. Lisa finally spoke, her voice quiet and shaped like warmth rather than interrogation. You did not win to watch them lose, she said. You want to be free. Sarah nodded slowly. Her hands were wrapped around her mug, the steam rising gently into the morning air. She stared out at the horizon for a long time before she answered. I kept thinking, she said, that if I did everything right, one day they would look at me and see me. Really see me. And I didn't realize how much I was disappearing in the process. I thought endurance was love. I thought sacrifice was loyalty. I thought patience was strength. She paused. The truth settled in the space between them. But I was breaking. Quietly. Slowly. I was becoming smaller and smaller so they could feel larger. So they could feel right about what they believed I was. The wind moved through the pines, rustling softly, like someone turning pages in a book. And now, Lisa asked, not pushing, only opening a door. Sarah lifted her gaze. Her eyes were steady, not hardened, not cold, simply awake. Now I understand, she said. I was never the problem. I was the mirror. And some people will do anything to avoid seeing themselves. The world did not change after she said it. The sky did not brighten. The air did not warm. But something within her settled. Something old. Something heavy. Something that no longer belonged to her. She took a slow breath. The kind of breath one only takes when one finally believes the world will not collapse if they allow themselves to live fully inside their own body. The house behind her was quiet, warm, filled with possibility rather than memory. The land before her stretched wide and open, a place where seasons could shift without consequence, where growth did not require justification. Lisa leaned back in her chair, her presence steady. Sarah looked forward, her voice barely above a whisper, but certain in the way truth always is when it arrives at the right time. Some families only learn love when they lose the one who gave it. And for the first time in her life, Sarah did not feel lost. She felt found. By herself. By peace. By the quiet life she had always deserved. And the world, at last, was silent in the right way.